Dr. DeLiema, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
So, can you give the audience a little bit of background about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I am an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota School of Social Work, and I'm actually a gerontologist, which is the study of human aging. But my specialty is on financial scams and fraud, particularly among older adults.
Awesome. And I was to say, not that these scams are limited to older adults, but that's just where the focus of your research is, right?
Right. I actually came into this area by studying financial exploitation and abuse by friends and family members. But it was really the scam cases by an external perpetrator, someone who starts out as a stranger to the older adult, that really drew me in. And so I decided to focus on that area.
So, was there a particular incident in a relative's life that got you interested in this field in general, or was there some other, just happenstance that got you interested in this field?
Fortunately, no. No one in my personal life, to my knowledge, has been exploited by friends and family. Although when I was a graduate student back at USC School of Gerontology, I actually sat in on many of the cases, the elder abuse cases that were discussed by the Los Angeles County Elder Abuse Forensic Center. And it was the financial exploitation cases that really required that multidisciplinary team approach, because you needed detectives, prosecutors, cognitive psychologists, geriatricians, everyone to really weigh in to decide what happened, what was this person's capacity in understanding the exploitation and the money transfers, and how do you follow the money?
Yeah, it's not a simple task to unwind these things.
No, it's not something that your local adult protective services or even police department are very, trained to do.
So let's dig into some of the research that you've done, and I'll start with a question that I know the answer to because I've been doing this a while, and we talked earlier. And this is not financial crimes and financial victim being a victim or a target of financial crimes is not just limited to the elderly, is it?
No. So when I started off doing this research, I really did take a larger focus on older adults. But then as I got more acquainted with all the different agencies that are looking at fraud, got access to different data sets on fraud, we discovered that, fraud really impacts people across the life course. We do find that older adults, that is people 65 and older, tend to lose more money per incident that they report compared to younger adults. But in terms of who's vulnerable, it's all of us. I always say if there hasn't been a scam that you've succumbed to yet, it's just coming. They're very tailored, they're very targeted, and they're very specific. So that's what I always like to warn people. It's coming. And it's coming for me too. I haven't met my scam yet, but I'm sure I will.
So I don't know if you've done much research in the targeting. Is the reasoning why the scammers are targeting older people because there's a perception that they're more likely to fall for the scams, or is it just that they're more likely to have a nest egg or a larger sum of money, or some other reason?
Yeah, we think it's a combination of those factors. So, if you're a cunning criminal and you want to get the biggest bang for your buck, who are you going to go after? The really wealthy retiree who's sitting on a multi-million-dollar nest egg, or the broke college student? So, yeah. It makes good financial sense to target those who are wealthier. But also there is some evidence that, especially with COVID, social isolation among older adults has made them more vulnerable. And then there's also substantial evidence that there are changes in the brain that affect financial decision making. And those changes in the brain actually are areas that are distinct from the areas that we see declining in diseases like Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. So people can be experiencing these declines in their financial decision making even when they are disease-free and don't have Alzheimer's disease.
Is there any diagnosis? Have you guys figured out what causes that decline in decision making?
That's where kind of the research is happening now, or what are the causes in changes in in financial decision making. It's more frontal lobe areas. So, this is reasoning, this is planning, this is executive functioning. This isn't memory. Of course, that is important as well when we're making these decisions in the moment, when we're being targeted. But really, it's those executive functioning capabilities that decline, and they decline earlier than all other cognitive detriments. So it's really hard for friends and family members, or even the person themselves, to understand and recognize that it's happening, which makes them even more susceptible.
So that was my next question that I was writing down when you started talking about this decline in financial decision making. When does it, in your research, when does it start happening?
For many people, it's typically in the late 60s and 70s. Like I said, it's the earliest area of cognitive functioning to be affected just by the normal aging process. So kind of outside of the disease process. And again, that's what makes it so insidious, is that it's happening. People don't recognize it's happening. Individuals who are experiencing these declines are still able to drive, do all the grocery shopping, their meal planning, because it's really those complex decisions that are affected. The ones that require you to, weigh a lot of different types of evidence that might be affected by emotional arousal and a lot of the tactics that scammers use to get us in these states where we can't make the best decisions for ourselves. So that's why it becomes so problematic.
Gotcha. And you talked about social isolation during COVID, scammers kind of leveraging that. How has that played out in the research as well? Why is it that social isolation makes us more susceptible?
Yeah, so social isolation has a kind of a two-pronged effect. One is simply the act of being alone, means there's not another person available for you as the target of a scam to say, hey, I'm just getting this phone call. Does this sound reasonable? Did we pay our taxes? Is so-and-so, our grandson, actually in trouble? So there's just not another body to kind of bounce an idea or something that was pitched to you off of. The second reason that social isolation has a negative impact and increases susceptibility is that for some people, being alone increases feelings of loneliness. And when you feel alone, you might be more open and susceptible to those pitches about friendship, romance, get-rich-quick schemes, anything that makes you feel more valued as an individual or as a member of society. It's another way that criminals kind of pitch their scam.
Is it just even some aspect of it, just having that conversation? If I'm only talking to one person a day and it happens to be a scammer, I'm just naturally, that we normally build kind of friendship feeling towards the people that we interact with. And if that's the only one that we're interacting with, we're a little bit more trusting of them.
It absolutely fills an unmet need. I often think about scam vulnerability as fraud criminals find those areas of unmet need. So one risk factor that we find to be significant in a lot of our studies is financial vulnerability. So we ask people questions like, if an unexpected emergency came up really recently, would you be able to cover a $1,000 expense without borrowing the money or putting it on your credit card? And it's the people that say, no, I probably couldn't do that we found were more likely to endorse that they've been victimized. Similar to folks that say, yeah, I have too much debt. I have more debt than I can handle. So it's those factors that, the financial vulnerability that increases susceptibility, and the emotional vulnerability, like loneliness, tends to correlate with scam victimization.
So would that also, the emotional vulnerability, would that also tie in with people that have experienced loss recently?
Yeah, so those, that are kind of trying to recover from a loss, they also, I would say, are more susceptible to kind of another pitch to kind of make up for those losses, because we're loss averse, and we're willing to kind of take a risk when we're in those feelings of losses. Goes back to behavioral economics.
And even with just the emotional losses, like if a spouse passes away, is there a timeline, kind of a generalized timeline of when people are more or less vulnerable during that recovery process?
Anecdotally, I've seen that people seem to be more vulnerable in the months following, becoming a widow or a widower. It's been really hard to bear that out with quantitative data.
Hmm.
One is that if you're asking people about events that happened in the past, they're really bad at organizing the timeline for themselves. And it's hard as a researcher to kind of prime those historical events to assess which came first. Were they a
Yeah.
victim of a scam and then they lost money? Did they lose money first and then they were a victim of a scam? And things like widowhood fall into that category. So qualitatively, anecdotally, we see that, but in the data, we haven't been able to show that.
Interesting. Yeah, it's not like you can, okay, 10,000 seniors, we're just going to talk to you every month to find out what's going on, and I guess that's the way to do it.
That is longitudinal data. That's the best way to do it, but it's the most expensive way to do it.
And there's no guarantee that, not that you want them to be scammed, but there's no guarantee that they're going to suffer a loss or that they're going to be a target of a scam during the study.
Right. Or if it happens, that they'll report it to you. That's a huge problem in our research, is underreporting, particularly among older adults and particularly among victims. People don't want to admit, and it's a couple things that are going on with older populations. Maybe they were a victim and they know they were a victim, but they don't want to share it. Maybe because the consequences feel really high. This could lead to me losing my financial autonomy. My kids are going to take over. Others, they might have experienced a scam, but they're true believers. They still think that $1 million sweepstakes is coming to them. So they will also report that they haven't been a victim of a scam. So it becomes really tricky when we're looking at what are the links between certain vulnerability factors and scams, because people are miscategorizing themselves as non-victims.
So what percentage, as far as, your best guesstimate of elderly or seniors that do get scammed actually report?
Oh, research has been showing it's like less than 1 in 40. Some recent research from the FTC are using the Consumer Sentinel data and then real data from criminals on scams found that for low dollar loss scams, like under $100, fewer than 1 in 3,000 victims report to the Federal Trade Commission. But for high dollar loss scams, like losing over $1,000, it's more like 1 in 10 people report. But still, that's not just looking at older adults, that's everyone. I think it really shows that we're just seeing a tiny proportion of those who've actually been victimized in the complaint data.
I mean, it kind of, I think it makes sense that, if I lost a couple $100 to a scam, with where I'm at in my life, it's like, okay, this is a lesson learned. It's not worth the hassle of my time and effort to file a complaint anywhere. Whereas the larger amounts kind of would make sense that people are the loss is more impacting to their day-to-day lifestyle.
Yeah, right. And people are, looking for some sort of retribution possibly down the road. You want to put, and I do want to encourage people to report no matter the dollar loss, because you want to put your name in the hat and raise your hand and say, I've been affected by this scam. Not only does it help federal agencies target resources, but if there was ever a big case and money recovered from that scam, you want to be on the list of people to, have a recovery. So that's why I think reporting, yes, it takes 10 minutes of your time, but it could be absolutely worth it in the end.
And so in terms of reporting, do you have particular organizations, or like where should people report different types of things?
Yeah, so depending on the type of fraud that we're talking about, people should report most types of scams to the Federal Trade Commission. Other types of crime, especially any scams that involve the internet, that I recommend reporting through IC3, the Internet Crime Complaint Center. That has a number of people looking at the cases, looking at the dollar losses, and trying to see if there's anything that they can do in the moment to help stop the loss of funds, especially when we're talking about the $10,000+ losses.
Gotcha. So when it comes to, let's look at how to deal with these from a couple different perspectives. For ourselves as we age, what are some of the things that we can put in place to either offset that financial decision making or things that we can set up in our lives to help prevent us from falling victim?
Right. So I think there's a couple of things that we can do if we want to take a shot at just early prevention. I believe in delegating and pulling people in your life into your financial affairs prior to, any sort of cognitive issues that may or may not arise in later life. So I'm talking about post-retirement. That's when you should have your estate plan done, thinking about, who in my family or close circle of friends would I trust to step into my shoes and make my financial decisions for me, should I not be able to? Just like how we all think about a healthcare power of attorney. You need a financial power of attorney. And then start bringing them in, and then use them as your kind of go-to, backup. If you ever have a question about something, if you ever get a phone call or something you don't recognize, that could be the person you call saying, does this sound suspicious to you? Or in fact, my father-in-law constantly sends me emails. He knows they're a scam, but he wants me to see how good they are at times. So I think that's great. Pick a buddy and just, send them things that you see and just get a second opinion.
And then for our parents, as they're aging, how can we help them kind of still have that sense of I'm running my own life and my kids aren't micromanaging me, but
Yeah.
also be able to, I don't know, insert ourselves in a way that can help prevent loss?
Well, that's the thing I always want to emphasize. By naming and designating your power of attorney, by bringing them into your financial decisions, you're actually extending the period in which you can be, financially autonomous and make your own decisions, because you're protecting yourself from loss. Because the minute that you lose, half of your retirement is the minute your family members are going to just do what they can to stop you from having access to your own funds. And the more that you can show and showcase how you're still in the driver's seat and this is how you make decisions, and it extends the period in which people will see how you make decisions and mimic that if they ever had to fully take over for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you're more financially protected by doing this, and you're more in control. The other thing I would say for adult children as they approach their parents, bring it into their own, personal experiences. Like, Mom, you will not believe the scam that I almost, fell for the other day. This is what happened. This is what they said, and you would be surprised how many times you'd be like, no way, a similar thing happened to me. I actually did pay money. And it can open up those kind of communication channels to talk about finance and money. And people sometimes find that their kids have, you never think about taking advice from adult children. Sometimes they have great advice.
Well, I think that sense of vulnerability, not vulnerability to a scam, but being personally vulnerable with the things that you've experienced, also elicits a likewise response in the other person. So if you say, "Oh my gosh, I got a call from a scammer," you talk about it, they're going to say, "Oh yeah, I got the same call," or maybe I even fell for the scam.
Right.
And I know that there's a certain amount of stigma in society of people that have fallen for scams. It's one of the things I talk to my guests about and ask why I ask them, have you fallen for a scam? Is because I've dealt with cybersecurity experts that they'll say, yeah, I had a cybersecurity blunder and I had a computer compromise, and so it helps people realize, well, if this is happening to the experts, then it's not surprising that it's happened to me also, and I shouldn't be ashamed about it.
Right. To kind of normalize the experience. Yeah. And the reality is every person, 65 and older knows a friend, a family member that's experienced fraud. They know friends and family members that have been totally taken advantage of by adult children, by professionals that come into their lives late in life. And so those are also great conversation starters to say, gosh, look what happened to Aunt Deborah. Let's make sure that doesn't happen to you.
Yeah.
Let's work together. Make it collaborative. This isn't about taking over. We live in a really complex society now, financially complex, our communication systems are complex. Let's set ourselves up for safety and protection as we age.
So are there any kind of trends in scams that you're seeing that are particularly concerning or just kind of newer that we should be watching out for?
Well, I think that there are some broad trends that we should be looking out for. One is the aging of the population. So By 2034 or 2035, the Census Bureau estimates that for the first time in US history, there's going to be more older adults in the United States than children and teenagers. It's
Oh, wow.
a huge shift in our population and our demographics. Another big trend that's on the horizon is going to be the greatest wealth transfer of all time as the baby boomers pass on and, pass on their wealth to the millennials, largely the millennial generation. And I think that that's going to have a lot of criminals coming out of the woodwork looking to how they can cash in on that too.
Yeah.
So, and then I just, you keep hearing things in the news about financial markets and a lot of things to be concerned about and a lot of fraud happening under our nose. So I don't think scams and fraud are anything that we're, getting control of or that's going to go away anytime soon. And with all of those other trends kind of happening at the same time, we just need to be really, really kind of wary. And again, think about how can we protect ourselves in this kind of new world.
Yeah, and I guess it's, talking to our parents when big financial things happen in the news and get their kind of as a starting point to have a discussion. So when we're recording this is Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank have just been taken over by the FDIC, and so people are going to be a little bit more paranoid about their own banks and maybe more susceptible to scams saying, "Hey, I've got this bank that's more secure and more safe, and we have these safeguards to prevent this sort of thing."
Yeah, and I would hope that those claims are legitimate, but you have to, really second guess everything. All these new technologies, new way to transfer money. I know in Germany there was that payment app that got so many investors that turns out to largely just be entirely a fraud. We have all these cryptocurrencies now that you have to be really skeptical about. So I think just having conversations about financial markets and money with different generations really helps educate everyone.
Yeah, and I think, I don't want to blame everything on COVID, but COVID accelerated a lot of these transitions to us moving away from credit cards and cash to using payment apps because everyone was like, I don't want to touch anything. And so that accelerated transition kind of exposes that maybe some of these apps aren't as well designed as we'd hope them to be, as well as people just taking advantage of them with fake apps and people feeling the pressure to, well, if this is just the way things are now, I've got to make this sudden change that I'm not comfortable with.
Absolutely. Yeah, we really saw that with kind of the peer-to-peer apps and older adults. We saw with the pandemic the big shift from government imposter scams to business imposter scams when everyone was like, wait a second, everybody now has an account at Amazon. Why don't we just pretend to be Amazon? Why are we pretending to be the SSA? Very few people feel that they have a very close connection with the Social Security Administration, but everyone has a Amazon account or is waiting for a package from UPS. Let's just be them. So I think scammers are so good at taking advantage of whatever big societal shift is happening in the moment.
Yep. So do you think there are things that businesses should be looking to do to change in the way they operate their businesses to help protect their customers from being scammed indirectly?
Yeah, better customer service. If someone calls, pick up the phone and have it be a real person. And because criminals take advantage of poor customer service. It's pretty easy to, convince someone you're their financial institution if they can't get a hold of their real financial institution or if they're given the runaround. So, that's what I would say. Invest in employees and people. And take the time that you have with customers to educate them on imposter scams. Like if you are Amazon, there should be so much stuff out in your front page, beware, if you're getting these text messages or this, we will never text you this information.
Yeah.
Or we will never call you and request this information. And I'm seeing that a little bit more from some of the major financial institutions. Like we will never ask for your passcode. But you'd hope that they would do that a little bit more.
Yeah. And people don't know what entities will and won't text me and what ones will and won't call me, what ones want to, there are some entities that I deal with that want a PIN code to have a conversation with me. that I've
Mm,
set up in their platform that's just separate from the two-factor authentication PIN code, and it all just gets very blurry very, very
right,
quickly.
right.
Do you still see a trend of seniors being taken advantage of with gift cards and things like that?
We definitely see gift cards still trending. Older adults are one of the largest consumer segments that seem to be purchasing gift cards as a result of some sort of scam solicitation. Um, I think it's a tricky issue. You can see why scammers love them. They're anonymous, they're easily accessible. They're not like having to walk an older adult through how to, use Zelle
Yeah.
or any sort of I mean, any sort of cryptocurrency
Yeah.
transaction. So they're so much easier. Um, and but retailers, I think, are starting to wise up. In fact, I was at a major pharmacy chain a couple of weeks ago, and I saw the manager having, gosh, I must have kind of been eavesdropping for 15 to 20 minutes, trying to convince this older woman that he was not going to sell her any more gift cards. And she
Mm.
was so upset and so combative with him. And he was so calm, and he explained why he was concerned. He did a really good job. I almost wanted to call and congratulate him, afterward. But I do think that they're starting to wise up. But in some of my research, I found that it's not even sufficient,
Oh,
that a
wow.
person will just leave and go to the next store. And the criminals are so good at turning their target, to get them to mistrust the retailer, the actual human being standing in front of them, and trust the stranger on the phone, them more. That it becomes really difficult. I've had research participants in interviews say, I saw the signs, and they tried to tell me, but I just ignored it because I just said, yeah, but those are other people who are being victim of a scam. This isn't a scam. It's really hard.
So I'm kind of curious about that. What made that person, or were you able to figure out why that person was so convinced that, well, if it's happening to somebody else, it's a scam, but for me, it wasn't?
Yeah, it was the things that they were learning from the person on the phone. So, it could have been a computer virus, and they had flashing lights and siren sounds coming out of their machine, and they're just not in a mental state to process those warning messages when the person is in front of them. Sometimes they just assume, well, that really was my boss that asked me to go and buy these gift cards. And oh yeah, I can see how that this would seem concerning,
Yeah.
spending $500 in gift cards, but that's not me. Some of my participants said that what really got through to them was when the retailer took an empathetic, human-centered approach. Like, I see what's happening and I'm concerned, and this is why. Some said that when the questions just seem really rote and routine, do you know who you're purchasing this for? They just ignored it and kept
Yeah.
going through. And I think what happens is the fraud criminal forewarns people, you're probably going to get questions about
Yeah.
this, just like fraud fighters do. You're probably going to get this. This is what the pitch is going to sound like, and this is what they're going to say. And that really just kind of inoculates them from the protection message that they're getting. So it's so problematic that I actually think that there should just be limits on what gift cards people can buy and how much. I think
Yeah.
the limits should be way lower, that the payment amounts, no buying in multiples, and also we need to think about how to protect people who are purchasing these gift cards online.
Yeah. Because they're not getting they're not getting the pushback from attentive retailers.
No, there's no person there.
I mean, I've listened to some of the scam baiter calls with the scammers, and it's really crazy to hear that the scammers coaching the person on what to say. Well, if they ask you what it's for, tell them this. If they question why you're doing it, tell them this. So it's almost like if someone is coaching you on someone is coaching you, that should be a red flag in and of itself.
Right. Right. Yeah. They're getting the target to say, like, you and I are in on this together. The world is kind of our combatant. So we have to overcome, this together. So yeah, because some people think that what they're doing is secret, and secretive. So yeah, it's really hard. And when we already have kind of an antagonistic relationship with our own financial institutions now, that doesn't help.
Yeah. And I think everyone has had an antagonizing experience with a financial institution at some point in their life.
Yeah, yeah.
There was some overdraft fee, some junk fee that you experienced, or something went wrong,
Mhm.
and it was not a good experience resolving it.
Right. Absolutely.
So, any other parting advice or suggestions that you have before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure other guests in your show have said the same thing, but we just need to take a pause. If anything sounds like a sales pitch or there's any high pressure sales tactics, that is such a red flag. Most legitimate advertisers and marketers, I feel, have moved a little bit backed up from high pressure sales.
Yeah.
Anyone comes to your door and tries to sell, take their literature and ask them that you'll call them. Just never make a decision in the moment. Another thing that criminals are so good is they make a financial transaction not seem like a financial transaction, like with the SSA imposter scam. Go buy gift cards to protect your money.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like you're paying money for something. It feels like you're just moving it from one form to another. Thinking that you're selling money from your checkings to your savings when you're not. So it's not even like financial literacy that's at play here. It's our ability to detect if someone's trying to persuade us.
So anytime anyone's asking us to do a financial transaction of any amount, we should be concerned.
Yeah, even if it doesn't feel like money is even involved, right?
Yeah, probably even more if it doesn't feel like money's being involved, we should be more concerned.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Dr. DeLiema, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
If people want to find out more about the research that you're doing, where can they find you online?
Yeah, they can find me. They can search my name, Marti DeLiema, and my faculty profile comes up, and you can learn more about the work I do on fraud, scams, and aging.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.